Hey everybody, it's Mick Lebinskas here from Climate Salad. I'm here at Greenhouse here in Sydney, and I'm chatting to Matt from Fowles Wines. Hey Matt, how you going?
Good, thanks, mate. How are you?
Really good. We've been having a great chat already, and I realized I'd forgotten to hit the record button, and I just want to get back to some of that. Let's just start with a quick intro to tell us about Fowles Wine.
Yeah, so we're a family-owned wine business in northeast Victoria in a beautiful remote place called the Strathbogie Ranges, up on a top of a mountain. You can't see buildings from the vineyard. It's truly remote, although it's only an hour and a half from Melbourne. So yeah, we're a cool climate wine producer, and we produce a large range of wines, 13 different varieties we have to play with. And I guess, my background I mentioned to you earlier was as a lawyer, and I've studied environmental science and majored in soil science. So I think I'm not a younger bloke anymore, but when I came into the industry 19 years ago, I was very young for the farming community up here, and I hopefully have brought a bit of a different mindset to the farming locally.
That's great. And again, one of the reasons I'm really enjoying chatting to you is the intersection of the innovation on the side I work on and the realities of actually running a business and producing a product like that you're working on. Can you tell us in terms of in terms of the, I guess, the environmental sustainability journey, is that something which is, I think you mentioned that you're dealing with climate every single day, but in terms of like noticing that something was kind of wrong or there was a problem here, can you tell us like how that came about and how that got started to be a major focus?
Yeah, look, I think farmers are amazingly adaptive. Like I look at the experience in COVID, for instance, and farmers just know we have to react to stuff. The weather, Mother Nature's our boss, and that's the way it works. So we're actually good in day-to-day interactions with nature. But what we notice were these broader patterns. So, as I sit here now, we've nearly finished vintage, and it's the earliest vintage on record, and they're trends that are hard to ignore. So we actually have to genuinely adapt, not tinker around the edges, and that's what we're throwing our minds into now. For me personally, I wouldn't bore you with the years of thinking around this, but ultimately we've arrived at a position as a winery to farm in nature's image. We have been conventionally farming for a relatively short amount of time, and in that time have done an extraordinary amount of damage. So I think we need to challenge that, and Mother Nature's done a very good job of keeping things going in the way she does. So we have a lot to learn from that. And in terms of the vineyard, I'm not a fan of these neat rows that have bare earth under the vines and a little rose bush at the end. In our vineyard, like if we walked into a forest, it's chaotic. There's thousands of species all interacting and doing their thing. And I think the vineyard should reflect that. So in our case, we have many, many, many grass species. We aim for more than 12 through the mid-row with a view to trying to have it green all year round. We have cover under the vine. What a wonderful defence against a warming climate to have, instead of having bare earth baked by the sun, have grass underneath as a barrier to the heat, and obviously a place for insects and so on. So we're, I guess, challenging conventional norms in the industry and having a lot of fun, provoking discussion, I've got to say.
Yeah, that sounds like it. It is really interesting. I think wine is one of those things which is, you think about the absolute basics of humanity of air, clean water, and food. Your wine is a really interesting one. We've obviously been developing it as a species for thousands of years, and it has been really, really a refined art. But we've got this refined art and this cultural connection. Um, um, Actually, not. I think, as you said, it's kind of in conflict with nature. Like we've just developed it, and we just pushed it past the point of actual sustainability. And I think it's interesting. A lot of people say to me, "Oh, you're trying to take away all the good things in the world." It's like, yeah, I love a glass of wine, but it's we just need to do it in different ways. So it's really interesting that we're not saying, "Oh, now you've got to make wine in a factory and make it from absolute scratch from cells." You're like, it's some minor changes, like you different rows, different grasses, different ways of doing the pesticide. So it's really interesting. It's much more about an evolution than it is about a revolution, right?
Yeah, that's right. And look, maybe one day, years from now, we work out that in the changing climate, wine's not the thing to grow there, and that'd be a devastating day for me because I love it. And but you've just got to keep your mind open to it. But yeah, we've done some pretty interesting things that others haven't to date, or it's very early. So one example is understanding. We did a full ecological survey of the vineyard, so I wanted to know, if we believe about farming in nature's image, well, what do we have here in nature on the farm? And one thing it revealed is these populations of microbats, and microbats are these incredible animals, as small as your thumbnail, perhaps 10 grams, can eat their body weight in food every single day. Which I'm a big bloke, that would be very much impossible. If you scaled a microbat to the size of a lion, the male lion would cower in fear. Their jaws and their biting pressure, their teeth, they're unbelievable predators. And the reason I mention is in the vineyard we have two key pests, light brown apple moth and grapevine moth, and of course these bats love eating them. So there was some research from a couple of PhDs from the University of New England. They did it in relation to cotton, and they worked out that the bats were managing a lot of the pests. And so we said, well, why don't we do the same study in wine? And they think that they can save the wine industry $50 million a year in sprays. And that's one thing, the commercial interest. But what about all the sprays that aren't going into the broader environment and damaging non-target species of insects and so on? So there's a potentially huge dividend that I think is worth exploring. So we're looking at it now. We've done the longest study of its kind in Australia, possibly the world, where we've recorded exactly the microbats, their activity. We understand it well. And now we need to figure out a way how we can encourage them to graze more fully through the block to get that even coverage. Because what they'll do is they'll come out for about 50 meters and then they get fearful because they navigate by sound. So they get fearful when there's nothing to bounce sound off of, and they go back.
All
So we
right.
want to. So the challenge now is, and this is interesting in your space with all these clever people you work with, how do we encourage the distribution of bats throughout the block so that there's, never an interest in spraying sprays for these things. And this is relevant, by the way, to cotton, to cherries, to all these other industries as well. So the conventional thinking is, why don't we whack a few posts in the ground and put some nesting boxes and so on, which I see as very strong intervention. It could still be a good idea when we're exploring it now. But the other idea I've had and we're progressing is that can we find a way to help them navigate through the block? So rather than building new homes, take the bats that are happy there living naturally anyway and give them effectively a pathway over the vineyard. So what I'm imagining is some vertical structures that let them bounce sound and continue to feed all over the block.
That's so interesting, and I love it as well. But it's I think the copying nature rather than actually implementing humans' thoughts across. I think that is getting back to respecting that. I think is really really valuable, and it's great to see. Like I think again, I think Australia we have such a rich history in agriculture, and I think as you mentioned, it's a matter of actually engaging it in the right way. And just on that, my last question for you is. I run into a lot of climate deniers. You must run into a lot in terms of agriculture and farming. Like how, partly for me, I'm just going to focus on people who are doing positive things, like how you're doing. Like how are you? Like how is that conversation going? Is it something that everyone understands because farming's so impacted by climate, or is it still actually a mixed bag?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tricky one to answer because, there's sort of different experiences you hear through media or versus what you hear locally. Locally, I'd say people are very aware. I think farmers cop a bad rap sometimes. The ones that I speak to and so on, and there's a broad network, a broad church of people, they're actually nature lovers. At fundamentally, these are the guys that are getting up in the middle of the night in winter to check on little lambs.
Yeah,
They love nature, whether or not
yeah,
they'll admit it. They got this sort of hard exterior and the stoicism that they're famous for. But
yeah,
at the end of the day, they're nature lovers. And look, I think people they do recognise that things are changing and
yeah.
there is more erratic weather and so on. I mean,
Yeah.
it's very difficult to know in a practical sense. So I think
Yeah.
that a lot of these conversations are more progressed. I think the wine industry is probably the most uh, or equal to the most progressive in terms of
Mm.
all agriculture. I think wine
Yeah.
industry is very aware of it and focused on it and talking about it all the time.
Mm.
I'm less connected to and less across sort of broadacre cropping, for instance, and things
Sure.
like that. But
Yeah.
I think people are talking
Yeah.
about it.
That's great. Well, look, really excited to hear the progress and the fact that it's you're really committed to it and getting those good results. And just love the conversations around how do you embrace nature rather than just sitting on top of it. And so, look, thank you so much for sharing today. We'll include the link to the website in the show notes. And yeah, really appreciate you sharing the story today, Matt.
No worries. Thanks.